Welcome back to beautiful Ner Avram. This year on the Parsha, again, it should be in memory of Rabbi Dr. Rivkin that I just saw when I came here. I saw about that. And he was a part of this and an inspiration and someone who did many big things in his life in very small ways. There's a rabbi here in Israel named Rabbi Beryl Gershenfeld. He started 2 yeshivas in Israel and a whole kiruv rechoking operation in America. And Rivkin said that when he was in Connecticut, he invited him over when he was a student in I think Trinity College it was called there in Connecticut. He invited him over for Shabbos meals, and this was really part of his journey that eventually led him to taking a break after college and going to yeshiva and starting this whole organization. He had different adventures. He was a chaplain on an army base when he was still single for a couple of years out in Texas or something, and he did some good things there. That's just a little bit of what we know. So Shabili Nishmas. Okay, Parshas Nitzavim always comes leading up to Rosh Hashanah, and we have to try to see what's there it's meant to be an encouraging Parsha, right? Atem Nitzavim Hayom, Rashi brings in the beginning. After we saw the Tocha in last week's Parsha, so Am Yisrael, right, were trembling and in shock. And he says, Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem. Now, Mefarshim point out that the Torah is eternal. So if it says that all of Am Yisrael are standing before Hashem now, that means always all of Am Yisrael is standing before Hashem now. Now, what is this Kulchem? So the Kulchem is that there's an entity called Kol Yisrael. There's an entity called Am Yisrael, Klal Yisrael. And what we have to do, what we have to do is for a person to be part of Klal Yisrael, to connect to Klal Yisrael. So that's Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem. And this is one aspect of what the Torah tells us. It says, Kulchem, right? The Sfas Emes says that the klal needs the prat and the prat needs the klal. Meaning, obviously, the nation has to be made up of the individuals. But an individual must be part of the nation. Right? That's really kind of that formula of im ena nili mili uchshani la'atzmi moani. So, Am Yisrael have to realize that. And to understand that, this is a way in which you can get before Hashem. Why am I emphasizing this? There's a beautiful piece from Rav Pinchas of Koretz. Rav Pinchas of Koretz was one of the, kind of a Talmud Chaver, what you would call with the Baal Shem Tov. He was more a colleague of the Baal Shem Tov, almost, in the very beginning roots of Chassidus. And he said something that hit me very much because I think we've all felt it at some point. He said, why is the davening on Rosh Hashanah so long and so repetitive? Meaning, if we look at all the stuff we're saying, not even the Amidah, the different piyutim that we add in, they all have one theme. Hashem is the Melech. Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimlach, right? All sorts of songs about the Malchus of Hashem, again and again. We get it the first time. Hashem's the Melech. Why do we go on and on? So he explained like this. He gave a mashal. He gave a parable. A man committed a terrible crime. He's imprisoned. He's tried, and he's sentenced to death. Now, in the laws of the country, there's only one way in which his sentence could be commuted. The king could do it. The question is, how does he get to the king? How does he get to stand in front of the king? If he can stand in front of the king, he could plead for mercy and the king can get rid of his sentence. But how do you get there? He said the davening that we do on Rosh Hashanah is how we travel to the king. Meaning, the more that we make that real to ourselves, that Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, that Am Yisrael are always before Hashem, that Am Yisrael always have that connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we can do that and we can get there, then all things are possible. But we have to make that real to us. Okay, so therefore, it says, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Anochi haster astir ponai. Right? Hashem says, I will hide my face. So the Sfas Emes says, Sh'adam yodea be'emes sha'akol rak me'Hashem yizbarach rak shenistar mimenu. If a person knows that everything is from Hashem, and I can't see Hashem in it, but I know that He's there, he says, then you can create that connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why, right, it says that when a person will say, the Parsha describes the suffering that Am Yisrael will go through in the Golus, and the person will say, Al kiyena elokai bekirbi, because God is not within me, right? These bad things are happening to me. And then Hashem says, Anochi haster aster ponai, I will hide my face from you. And the question the Mefarshim ask is, wait, isn't this person making the right cheshbon? Isn't he saying, it's because God's not with me that these bad things are happening? He says, no, that itself deserves a punishment. You must learn that God is always with you, even in the time of Hester, even in the time of the hiding. So how do we get there? How do we connect? There's a pasuk in the Parsha Kavtes Kavches. It says, "Hanistaros laHashem Elokeinu, v'aniglos lanu ulvanenu adolam." The hidden things are to Hashem, and the revealed things are for us and our children forever. What are the hidden things and what are the revealed things? So with the way the Sfas Emes presents it in a few pieces here, he says there's a hidden aspect to everything in the world. There's a spark of Kedusha, of godliness, that makes everything exist. And Hashem is there everywhere, in everything, but hiding. Now, Hanistaros laHashem Elokeinu, right? And that which happens in this inner spiritual world that's behind our external physical world, so to speak, is all there. That's Hashem's. But we can connect to it. Haniglos lanu ulevanenu. Meaning, first of all, through Torah and mitzvahs, but even, says the Sfas Emes, by our day-to-day things. He says, if you realize that Hashem created me as physical, and he says, therefore, my limbs have to work with inyone olam hazeh, but nonetheless, behind all of that is spirituality. Al yedei zeh eino nifrad gam b'maaseh gashmi. So then when a person is shopping or building or eating or doing, he says, that is still connected to your connection to Hashem. He gave you those things as openings. So we've seen here two different types of openings. One is connecting to Klal Yisrael. When a person connects to Klal Yisrael, so then you connect to Hashem, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Am Yisrael are always standing before Hashem. If you can make that connection and remind yourself what you're part of, so you're always there. If you can remember the fact that nothing in this world is limited to its external, not me and not the things I'm involved with, and therefore, if I can remind myself that Hashem is there, then I break through, and once again, I connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why is it connected particularly to Rosh Hashanah? It's interesting. I have these strange thoughts. Again, it goes back to a fellow I knew in Chicago, a brilliant Talmud Chacham, but he also had a hobby of looking at different themes in world literature. And he said that if you see in different cultures themes that are there, sometimes it's actually expressing some truth that humanity knows deep inside, and that's why it keeps coming out. So one theme you find is this concept of what they call now like a portal, meaning that in this world suddenly you open some closet and you walk through and you're in another world, right? You find in all sorts of different ways, right? Whether you're walking through the wall at King's Cross Station and entering another world in London, right? Or anything from all these different stories. So the idea is that innately a human being understands that this can't be all that there is. That there's a world behind it and beyond it, but I have to get there, I have to remember it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us Torah and mitzvahs, that by doing things, they're niglos, they're things that exist in this world, but we connect with the nistaras. By doing a mitzvah, I enter a world that's hidden. I connect with a world that's hidden to other people. And there, as we say, you're lifnei Hashem Elokecha, you're before Hashem, you're before the King. Am Yisrael is a place in which is a people in which when you connect to them, once again, you enter a different existence. You connect with a different existence. And Rosh Hashanah is probably the most powerful day that we do it. So with that introduction, a bit from the Sfas Emes, let's get to a piece from the Avnei Nezer, who's from what they call the same cheder of Polish Hasidus. Avnei Nezer was the son-in-law of the Kotzker Rebbe. The Sfas Emes came from Gerach Hasidim, who were also Talmidim of the Kotzker Rebbe. So he comes to explain the following. The Medrash says that when Am Yisrael blow the shofar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mismale aleim rachamim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is filled with mercy on them. V'hofech aleim midas hadin l'rachamim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu overturns, transforms the midah, the attribute of din, of judgment, to rachamim. Emasai, when is this done? B'chodesh Hashvi, in the 7th month, the month of Tishrei. I'll just mention parenthetically when it talks about the idea of the rachamim. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev had such a beautiful explanation of one of the lines we're going to be saying in Slichas. You say, Anu malei avon va'ata malei rachamim. We say to Hashem, we are full of sin and you are full of mercy. So the way Rabbi Yitzchak would discuss this with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Baruch Shalom, Levi Yitzchak is full of averos. Malei avon, I'm full. But how big is Levi Yitzchak? You're full of rachamim, and how big are you? Right? Meaning, your infinite rachamim certainly can deal with my being full of oven. So he says like this. He says, "Be'emes yesh rachmanos gedola al neshama kedosha." A person has to look inside of himself. Who am I? Who am I? I'm not just a guf. I'm not just a body. Inside of me is a neshama. And that neshama is, call it a fragment, an extension of Kedusha that enters this physical world from its source, which is higher than the world of Malachim, much higher, right? That it comes from, Chazal describe it, mitachas l'kisi hakavod. It's from beneath Hashem's throne, meaning from the highest source of creation, and it comes from there into this world, into this goof, into this body. Now he says, you got to have pity on this neshama. Because what does the neshama go through? He says, when we do things that are counter to what the neshama knows it should be doing, and recognizing the neshama is a chelek elokam imal, a portion of godliness. It's a very shocking image, as if you take the king's head and you thrust it into the mud and drag it through the mud. He said that's what a person is doing. But we don't feel this. He says when a person is caught up in physicality and certainly in negative things, in averas, etc., you don't feel this. You don't feel this happening. You don't feel that your neshama, so to speak, is being tortured, right, or in pain with this. But when a person does tshuva and suddenly starts to realize these things, he has great rachmanus, great mercy on himself, right, and on his neshama. And he says that awakens great rachmanus above. Okay, listen to this interesting mechanism. If a person has rachmanus on himself, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu has rachmanus on him. Right? Somebody, Fred Devine, gave an example once. He said, let's imagine two people that are running for a bus. Right? I have to update this. I used to describe this scenario with money. People don't use money on the bus anymore. So one person comes running up to the bus, and he gets on, and he searches in his pocket for his Ravkav. He doesn't have it. Tells the driver, sorry, I forgot my Ravkav. Okay, I'll have to, get it some other time or something. The driver says, no, you have to pay to get on the bus. He said, listen, okay, how much money does it cost? It's nothing, okay? Forget about it. I got to get places. I'm in a hurry. Just drive. And he says, no, excuse me, get off the bus. He says, get off the bus? Are you kidding? For this. And everybody on the bus is going to start yelling at him, get off the bus. right? Scenario number 2. A person comes running up to the bus, huffing and puffing, and he starts patting his pockets. And he says, I am so embarrassed. I forgot my Rav-Kav. I am so sorry. I've never done this before. I don't want to, how can I deal with this? Here, take my watch as collateral, right? Please, here's my address. Take my passport, right? Take anything, right? I will pay you back, please. I'm so sorry. Half the bus will be offering to pay for him, right? The driver himself will offer to pay for him. What's the difference? One person has Rahmanas on himself, another one doesn't. Okay, so this opens it up, it awakens it. That's why the Brisker Rav explained this beautiful word also from the Slichas, from one of the Piyutim, Miponecha elecha evrach. This became like a motto almost for Yom Noraim. I run away from you to you. Meaning, I recognize my situation, I'm in trouble, so I want to run to get away from the trouble that I'm in. But where can a person run? Only to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when a person realizes that, I'm in trouble, and I have mercy on myself for that, but when I come, so then you have that mercy which is there. So therefore, he says, once a person realizes this, and they have mercy on themselves, this is the concept of the Satan getting mixed up. Okay, we often, when we were kids, we had this childlike picture of, to be ma'arbev the Satan, to mix up the Satan by blowing our shofar. We view the Satan as this kind of prosecutor there, and he has all of his files with all of our wrongdoings, and he wants to make his case, and we're blowing the shofar, and he's dropping his files, and he can't remember anything, he can't think, and we come out okay. So he says, no, Irbuv HaSatan is something else. He says the prosecutor has all of our wrongdoings. But once we've made the switch, and we remember who we are and who our neshama is, and when we look at what we did, we had mercy on ourselves, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu has mercy on us. So therefore, each new wrongdoing the Satan wants to present to the court makes us feel mercy on ourselves, pity on ourselves, and makes Hashem have pity on us. That's how Hashem moves from the seat of judgment to the seat of Rachmana. So the Satan doesn't know what to do. He's got a whole file of wrongdoings to do, but each one he presents seems to simply bring Hashem and us closer. So he doesn't know what to do. Okay, he says this is the idea, and this is really what the sobbing sound of the Shvarim Trua, what those are supposed to be. Chazal described them as 2 types of crying, Genuche Gonach and Yulule Yolil, whether it's sobbing type of crying or this kind of almost frantic, right, small cries. He says, why are we crying there? It's not just crying out of fear. He says, it's the crying out of Rahmanas, right? He says that it's a person that realizes, he remembers who he is, and suddenly he looks back. If you imagine a person who had amnesia, and he did all sorts of horrible things when he had amnesia, and suddenly he snaps out of it, he remembers who he is, and they start showing him the films of what he did when he had amnesia. He is going to feel so bad about those things. That's the Genuche Ganach Yulule Yolil, right? That's that crying which is there. It's not so much a crying out of fear or out of fear of punishment. It's crying in having pity on himself and what he did to himself. Okay, so when the Rambam says that the shofar has this famous remez, Uru Yesheni Mishanaschem, it's not just an idea of waking up out of sleep. The Rambam goes on to say that waking up represents remembering, V'zichru barachem. Remember who created you. Remember who you are. That's what the shofar can do, right, to wake that up for us. So he says, it's very hard still. It's hard for us to have this rachmanus when we're still not totally out of it. Okay, it's an important power that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us that's sometimes very helpful us, that we get used to everything. Okay, so therefore, that's why Chazal said, right? That if a person does an avera, repeats the avera, it's as if it's allowed. Meaning, we're able to get used to things. This helps us because if we end up in difficult situations in life, if we can't get used to a new reality, we'd be broken, right? It's a tremendous gift to be able to do it. But it can also desensitize us. Reb Shalom Shvadron, I once heard him speak, and he gave, as a mashal for this is what he felt. He noticed a couple of people who were working in the sewers. They were repairing a sewer here in Yerushalayim, and it came time for their lunch break. So they kind of like took out a cloth and wiped their hands a bit and sat down in the middle of the sewer and took out their pita and took out their hummus, and they were eating there. And he was thinking, how could they do it? And he realized, he said, that they got used to it, right? That a person can get used to it. So therefore, he says, this is our problem. It's all very nice to say that a person is going to be able to look at himself and to feel that rachmanis. He says, but when you're in the sewer, so to speak, you really don't feel any need for this. So he says, what you have to awaken then is something much more. It's not just your das, it's not just your mind, because again, we know things in our mind often. We know this is not what's supposed to be. But the distance between mind and heart is so huge, right? This is, I knew someone, it was Rav Moshe Shapira Zatzal. He was both a relative and a Talmud of Rav Dessler. So he said at one point when he was a young man, he asked Rav Dessler about Nagadata that described the huge distances between the levels of the Shomayim and the Rakia and the Oretz. He says, what is that Gemara talking about? So Rav Moshe pointed to him, he says, talking about the distance from here to here. From V'yodata Hayom, from what you know, to Vashevosa El Levavecha. To actually bringing it home to your heart, that you feel it. So what do? He says, there's a nakuda inside of us. There's a point inside of us. And this nakuda, he says, this inner nakuda, is something that's never been affected, can never be affected by anything we do. And every single Jew has this nakuda in them. And no matter what they've done or what they haven't done, that nakuda is there and that nakuda remains pure. And that nakuda is always aware of the reality of the world and of the life and of the neshama. He says, you have to somehow awaken that nakuda. He says that's what the shofar does. The shofar, right, it says in the Zohar HaKadosh, and others bring it, man de nofach midilei nofach, that when we blow the shofar, we're reversing the moment of our creation, when Hashem blew breath of life into a human being. When we blow out, right, we're going back to that nexus, that connection between us and this world and HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us. And that connection always exists. That's what that nakuda is. You can always reconnect because you're always really connected. Okay, he says, he gets into this geometrical picture. He says, why does it emphasize in the Medrash in the 7th month? 7 is always, if you imagine a three-dimensional cube, is that the three-dimensional cube? Yes, so it has 6 sides. And imagine one dot floating in the middle. He said that is that nakuda pnimis. And that's this idea of the 7 which is there. Okay, so this is what we're trying to do. In Parshas Nitzavim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us there's a reality that's always there. There's a reality of Hashem being inside of you. There's a reality of Am Yisrael being before Hashem. There's a reality that anything you interact with in the world can be your connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to that Atem Nitzavim-Vayelech Kulchem, and an expression of that inner point that you have. The problem is how you get there, how you awaken it. The shofar transports us. Right? The Gemara goes through, it's a little bit complicated to do in the couple minutes we have before Ma'ariv. The Gemara goes through a discussion of why the shofar, the horn of a cow, is not a good shofar. A variety of reasons. One reason which is brought is ein kategor nase sanegor. A prosecutor can't be a defender. We don't want to deal with cows, right? Because cow, calf, egel, don't want that. So the Gemara asks, what's the source for ein kategor nase sanegor? So it says that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he goes into the Kodesh Kodashim, he has to take off his gold clothes, and he has to wear only white clothes, because we don't want to be bringing that gold into there. The Gemara asks, wait a second, the Kodesh Kodashim is full of gold. There are Kodeshes in there, other things of gold. Gemara says, you're right, the problem is bringing the gold in. Then the Gemara asks, but the Kohen Gadol brings in a pan for the Keteris, which is made out of gold. The Gemara says, okay, it's bringing in gold which is there to beautify you, to make you beautiful. Okay, that's the problem. So then the Gemara goes back now with the knockout punch. Okay, but the shofar we don't blow in the Kodesh Kodashim, right? We don't bring it into the Kodesh Kodashim, right? How does it beautify us? So it explains, it says, shofar, kivan de lezikaron, since the shofar is there for memory, it's kibifnim domi. It's as if you go into the Kodesh Kodashim. And there Rabbi Yisrael Salenter said, a person has to really work on developing this image in the mind. When the shofar blows, you go by yourself, so to speak, just as the Kohen Gadol did, into the Kodesh Kodashim, to have that meeting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in which you remember everything. And that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges you, because that's the most merciful judgment, because that's when you remember everything. You remember the big picture, you remember who you are, you remember where you came from, you remember what you're supposed to do. And that's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu does it. That's why the shofar is such a tremendous gift to us. So we have to realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yimincha Pshuta L'Kabel Shovim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hand is stretched out to us. And the Sfas Emes says, even if a person hasn't been able to put it into action yet on Rosh Hashanah, our very thought and desire to return to Him, the very waking up and saying, wait a second, now I remember, things have to be different, that helps draw us close and helps us get that thing. So the strengthening that Moshe Rabbeinu told Am Yisrael, the Nitzavim, the idea of Hanisteros LaHashem Elokeinu v'Haniglos Lanu Levonenu, we always have the opportunity to connect with that hidden world, to remind ourselves of who we are, and to stand before the King on Rosh Hashanah and get a good judgment, which Am Yisrael should get every year. Kol Tuv.